Ever wondered if who you're attracted to is, like, hardwired in your brain? It's a question I've definitely pondered a time or two, and today's deep dive is all about that. We're going to unpack a fascinating new research paper titled Brain Structure Changes Associated with Sexual Orientation. Now, before we all turn into neuroscientists here, let's be real, this isn't about finding a gay or straight section in the brain. Nope, we're taking a more nuanced look at what this particular study can tell us, and maybe more importantly, what it can't. Basically, the researchers used brain imaging to compare the brains of heterosexual and homosexual men and women, their goal, to see if any structural differences jumped out.
Right. And it's important to keep in mind, this is just one tiny piece of a much bigger puzzle.
Right.
We were trying to understand something as complex and multifaceted as sexual orientation. It's not just one thing. Genetics, hormones, life experiences, cultural influences, how we even define sexual orientation in the first place. It's all connected.
Okay, so they scan these brains. What'd they find? Anything groundbreaking, or are we talking subtle nuances here?
Get ready to be intrigued. They did find some size differences. In specific brain regions, that is, between heterosexual and homosexual individuals.
Interesting. So, like, bigger this part, gay, smaller that part, straight.
Not quite. It's way more nuanced than that. We're talking about subtle variations in volume, mostly in three key areas: the thalamus, the precentral gyrus, and the putamen.
Thalamus. Pre-central gyrus. Putamen. Okay, time for a quick neuroanatomy refresher. Remind me what those areas actually do.
Think of the thalamus like Grand Central Station, but for your senses.
Ooh, I like that analogy.
Almost everything you see, hear, touch, taste, it all gets routed through the thalamus. But it's even cooler than that.
Okay, how so?
The thalamus is involved in how much pleasure and reward we experience from those sensory inputs.
You mean like the thalamus helps me appreciate a really good slice of cake?
Exactly. Or the feeling of a warm hug, the sound of your favorite song. The thalamus is right there in the mix.
Wow, I never realized the thalamus did so much. Okay, what about the precentral gyrus? Is that the part that makes me a terrible dancer?
Well, it is our brain's control center for movement, so
Yeah, maybe.
helps us move through the world, or at least try to. But think about it this way. Beyond physical movement, the precentral gyrus could be linked to how we perceive others physically, how we interact with the world around us, you know.
Interesting. Okay, so that's two down. What about the putamen? What's its claim to fame?
The putamen, like the thalamus, is part of the brain's reward system.
Oh, okay, got it. Reward center. So what's the link to sexual orientation?
Well, the study found something interesting. Homosexual women had larger putamen volume compared to heterosexual women.
Interesting, but they didn't see that in men.
Nope, not in men.
Hold on. Larger putamen in women, does that mean?
Now, let's not get ahead of ourselves. We're talking complex interactions here, not simple cause and effect.
Right, of course.
Right.
But still, a larger putamen in homosexual women is definitely interesting. So how did the researchers even connect these specific brain regions to sexual orientation? How did they make that leap?
They used a really neat technique called functional decoding. Imagine it like a map of the brain's wiring, seeing which regions are connected and talking to each other. They basically created a neural fingerprint for each person.
So it's not just about the size of these areas, but also how they're woven into the brain's overall network.
Exactly.
Okay, that's cool. So what did this neural fingerprint reveal?
Well, it turns out that those regions we talked about, the thalamus, the precentral gyrus, and yes, the putamen,
The gang's all here.
they were all involved in similar functions: action, perception, sensation, and you guessed it, reward.
Reward keeps coming up. So we've got these differences, but what do they actually tell us about sexual orientation? Let's get into that. So we've got all these fascinating clues about possible brain differences, but the million-dollar question is, what's it all mean? I mean, does this mean being gay or straight is all about the size of your thalamus, or what?
If only it were that simple.
Right.
This study gives us a glimpse into the biology, but it's not the whole story. Not even close.
Yeah, it's like we're missing the first few chapters of the book.
Exactly.
We're seeing the outcome, but not all the events that led to it.
And that's where things get really interesting. This study kind of throws a wrench in the whole nature versus nurture debate about sexual orientation.
How so?
Well, for a long time, people thought it was one or the other. Either you were born that way or your environment shaped you. But now we're realizing it's way more nuanced than that. It's probably a complex dance between biology A&D experience, and this study hints at how those two might be intertwined.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. It's like those nature documentaries where they show how baby birds learn to fly. They're hardwired to fly, but they still need the right environment and practice to actually do it.
Perfect analogy. And speaking of intriguing findings, there's one more thing from this study I wanted to mention. The researchers also looked at something called externally oriented thinking.
Oh, yeah. What was that all about?
Basically, it's about how much a person focuses on the world around them versus their own internal emotions.
Okay, so did they find a link between externally oriented thinking and sexual orientation?
They did. The study found that both homosexual men and women scored higher on measures of externally oriented thinking than their heterosexual counterparts.
Wait, so does that mean they're saying homosexual individuals are more observant, more tuned into their surroundings?
Let's not jump to conclusions.
Right, of course not.
It's super important to remember that correlation doesn't equal causation. Just because we see this connection doesn't mean we can say for sure that one causes the other. There could be tons of other factors involved, cultural influences, upbringing, personal experiences that could all contribute to this difference in externally oriented thinking.
So many variables.
Exactly.
It really highlights just how complex this whole topic is. But it's still a pretty fascinating finding, it makes you think. So if we had to sum up the key takeaway from this deep dive, what would it be?
I think the most important thing to remember is this study offers some really cool clues about possible brain differences linked to sexual orientation. But it's just one piece of a much bigger puzzle.
Right. It's not the be-all and end-all.
Exactly.
There's so much more to explore.
Absolutely.
Well, folks, on that note, it's time to wrap up this deep dive before our brains start doing the Macarena. But for those of you who want to keep those neurons firing, we've got you covered. We've got links to the original research paper and some other thought-provoking articles in our show notes. Because when it comes to the brain and things like sexual orientation, there are no easy answers. Just fascinating questions and a whole lot more to learn. Until next time, keep those minds curious.